My husband laughed when I said I'd go back to school. Now he works for me. For 20 years I was known only as James's wife. I took care of the house, the routine, the family while he grew professionally and made me believe that was my place. One day, with a trembling voice, I told him I wanted to go back to school. He laughed. A short, mocking laugh that cut through me like an invisible blade. In that instant, something inside me awakened. What began as a simple desire to start over gradually transformed into an intense journey of self-discovery, silent challenges, and profound triumphs. I faced cold stares, closed doors, and unseen pains. But I also found courage, unexpected support, and a strength I didn't even know I possessed. Today I look back with pride. My story isn't about revenge. It's about rebirth, feminine strength, and choices that change destinies. I'm happy to have you here. Follow my story to the end and comment with the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. The morning was calm like so many others. The sun shyly entered through the kitchen window, and the rustling of the newspaper filled the silence between us. It was then that, almost without planning, I said, "I've been thinking about going back to school." James, without looking up from his paper, let out a brief, incredulous laugh. He said I must be joking. Studying now? At this age? I froze. The coffee spoon stopped midair, and my chest tightened. James continued as if he'd said something trivial. "You missed your window, Anna. That's for young people, not housewives." There were no shouts. No arguments. Just that laugh. A short sound, but one that echoed like a sentence inside me. I wanted to respond, but the words caught in my throat. I took a deep breath, kept stirring my coffee, and pretended it didn't hurt. But it did. It hurts when someone who claims to love you laughs at your dream. It hurts even more when that person is the one you've supported most in life. In that instant, I understood something that took years to articulate clearly. He didn't see me. He didn't see my essence, my worth, my legitimate desire to start anew. But inside I crumbled like never before. I went to the bedroom in silence. I closed the door slowly, as if any noise would shatter me further. I leaned my back against the cold wood and let the tears fall. I didn't cry loudly. I didn't want him to hear. Each tear, however, was like a seed of something new. A timid sprout of indignation and courage growing inside me. I sat on the bed and took a deep breath. I thought of all I had given up for him. The years I had been his support, his foundation, his shadow. Always available. Always in the background. Always James's wife. But there, in that silence torn by my tears, something shifted. I no longer wanted to live a life on standby. I wanted to be the author of my own story. I opened the old laptop stored in the drawer. My fingers trembled as I typed colleges for adults. The options appeared one after another, and with them, a hope I hadn't felt in a long time. What if it was possible? What if, at 41, there was still a place for me? For my dreams, my ideas, my ambitions? If he thought it was too late, he was about to find out otherwise. 2 days later, I walked into the admissions office of a community college for the first time. My steps were uncertain but firm. The white walls, the posters with young faces, everything seemed to remind me that I didn't belong there. But I ignored it. I took a deep breath, smiled at the attendant, and asked for information about the business administration program. I wanted to learn to create, lead, build something of my own. She patiently explained how the evening classes, materials, and assessments worked. I stayed there for over an hour asking questions, taking notes, trying to understand everything. When she finally handed me the enrollment form, my hands were sweating. I filled out each line with a mix of fear and excitement. As I signed at the bottom, I felt as if I had just taken the first step of the hardest climb of my life. Outside, I sat on a bench and stared at that paper. It wasn't just an application form. It was a symbol, a shield, a silent promise that I would not give up on myself. I carefully put the document in my bag, almost like a secret. I still didn't have the strength to tell anyone, not even Emma. I held the enrollment paper like an invisible armor. I walked home slowly, feeling the weight of my choices and the slight tremor of a new beginning. James was in the living room watching TV, and didn't even notice me come in. I went straight to the bedroom, took off my shoes, and looked at myself in the mirror. The woman reflected there was tired, yes, but also determined. She was no longer the same. Something had awakened. Something he could no longer control. He still made jokes about my student phase, still laughed when I talked about college. But something had changed in me, not in him. Now, his words didn't paralyze me. On the contrary, they propelled me. Because deep down, I had already started a path that no longer depended on anyone's permission, much less his. He still laughed. But I had already started building my own path. My first day of class arrived like a new beginning, wrapped in fear and expectation. I entered the room with my heart pounding, avoiding comparisons with the young faces around me. I chose a desk in the corner, arranged my new notebook, and took a deep breath. The professor began the class with intriguing questions about leadership and reinvention, and my hands started moving on their own. I needed to write down every sentence. Little by little, insecurity gave way to curiosity. I raised my hand, asked questions, wrote down terms I didn't know. There were no laughs, no judgments. On the contrary, some looked at me with interest, perhaps even respect. I realized that my age brought something no one else there could teach: life experience. And that somehow was an asset I didn't know I had. The class passed too quickly. I left the room with shining eyes and the feeling of having discovered a new world. It wasn't just about studying. It was about reconnecting with who I was before I forgot myself. In that environment, my fears didn't disappear, but they were muffled by a growing force: the knowledge that I was finally choosing myself. I wrote down every word as if they were keys opening doors inside me. The nights began to transform. I slept less, but I felt more alive. With each class, my mind expanded, and my body, though tired, carried something different: purpose. James, noticing my routine change, didn't comment immediately, but it was visible. His discomfort hid in small expressions, in silences longer than necessary. He started making subtle comments. "Still studying? Where exactly is this going to get you?" With each phrase, he planted doubts that I refused to water. I realized he no longer recognized me, and that made him uncomfortable. It wasn't about my studies. It was about my autonomy, about the fact that I was moving away from the passive version he controlled. Even so, I continued. I would come home late from college to find the house dark, him already asleep, as if he didn't want to cross paths with me. I didn't blame him. I knew that, in silence, he understood what was happening. And perhaps what bothered him most was precisely that. I no longer needed his approval to continue. His eyes did not hide his discomfort. I was changing, and he knew it. It was in one of the first practical classes that I met Pamela Hall. She sat next to me and started a conversation naturally. I discovered that she had also started over after years away from the classroom. We exchanged brief confidences, but the connection was immediate. Pamela had a sparkle in her eyes and a courage that infected me. Soon we were placed in the same work group, and she proposed bold, intelligent ideas that I never would have dared to suggest. She encouraged my opinion, praised my analyses, and made me believe that my voice had value. One night, after finishing a difficult exercise, she looked at me seriously and said, "You have talent, Anna." Truly. That disarmed me inside. I smiled, not knowing how to respond. Perhaps no one had told me that in the last 20 years. And hearing it from a colleague, someone who saw me for what I was becoming, and not for what I had ceased to be, had a huge impact. I left that class with something different in my chest. A hope more alive, more confident. When Pamela said, "You have talent," I felt something bloom inside me. Returning home after those nights was like stepping into two distinct worlds. On campus, I flourished. At home, I withered in silence. James avoided questions, and Emma remained distant, increasingly oblivious to what I was experiencing. Even so, something in me remained firm, fueled by small victories. The warmth of the classes, the unexpected compliments, the new horizons. I was no longer the woman I used to be. There was still fear, but now it walked alongside my will. Pamela became more than a colleague. She was an anchor amidst the unknown. And my mind no longer thought of giving up. Thought of the future. Thought of possibilities. It thought of all that I could still build, even with obstacles in my path. In the living room, the atmosphere was glacial. Words with James were few, measured, and almost always neutral. But there was an invisible tension that filled the air. A silent war where every gesture seemed to carry a judgment. And I understood. Because for him, my growth was a kind of threat. For me, it was liberation. But the more I grew, the more my home became a silent battlefield. I came home enthusiastic about the results of the group project. The professor praised my analysis and mentioned in class how much my practical experience enriched the discussions. I felt like sharing it with someone, and out of habit I went to James. I told him what had happened, expecting perhaps a nod, a smile. But what I received was a comment that cut me deep. "Trying to be the star of the class now?" He laughed. "Next, you'll want to give motivational speeches." There was no humor in his voice. It was contempt disguised as sarcasm. And more than anything, it was fear, his fear of no longer being able to diminish me. I smiled back, trying to hide my disappointment, but inside something broke. I went to the bedroom and stared at my reflection in the mirror. I no longer recognized the woman who accepted these humiliations as if they were part of her routine. His words still hurt, but now they met resistance. Not because they hurt less, but because I was becoming stronger. I wasn't going to let that stop me anymore. Not this time. That silent pain was transforming into something new. Determination. The next day after class, I ran into Brenda in the college hallway. She invited me for coffee, and I accepted without hesitation. We sat in a quiet corner and I didn't need to say much. She noticed my exhaustion in my eyes. Little by little I started telling her about James, about his comments, about the emptiness of living with someone who was rooting against me. Brenda listened with a calming presence. She didn't interrupt. She just waited for my words to find their space. When I spoke of the pain of being underestimated in my own home, she held my hand and said, "Sometimes the courage we have in silence is greater than any shout." That hit me deeply, because I knew it was true. She talked about cycles, about how strong women are unsettling because they break patterns. "He fears you, Anna, because he's watching you slip from his grasp." I shivered. I had never put what I felt into words so clearly. There, in that brief conversation, I understood that my suffering wasn't weakness. It was the reflection of a strength he couldn't control. I left that conversation with a lighter heart and a firmer mind. The following week, the professor returned the assignments with grades. When I picked mine up, my heart almost stopped. 9.8, written in blue ink with a complimentary comment below. "Your approach was intelligent and mature. Keep it up." My hands trembled. It was more than a grade. It was validation, a sign that I was on the right path. I didn't tell anyone. I just folded the paper carefully and put it in my bag. It was my secret, my small private victory. At home, James watched TV as usual, oblivious to what I was experiencing outside. And that was okay. That achievement was mine. For the first time in years, something told me I no longer needed his approval. That night, I reviewed content with more eagerness, as if each page brought me closer to the woman I wanted to be. Doubt still existed, but now it walked alongside a certainty. I could. I was capable. And if no one else recognized it, I would. And that was enough for me. It was the beginning of something that no one else could erase. I kept that paper like a secret trophy. Even with all the small victories, I still wasn't prepared for what came next. The path of personal reconstruction isn't linear. And at that moment, I believed the worst was over. But life has cruel ways of testing our strength, especially when it starts to bother those who grew accustomed to seeing us fragile. The greatest pain wouldn't come from a stranger, nor from an academic challenge. It would come from who should have been my safe harbor, from whom I most expected support, and who, little by little, was revealing himself to be my greatest opponent. The high grade, the conversation with Brenda, the inner blossoming, all of it was just the beginning. I was about to face the hardest blow, because an abyss was growing inside my home. And no matter how much I fought to maintain peace, the reality could no longer be hidden. What I believed to be love was now stripping bare, revealing something darker, control. And that I was no longer willing to accept. But I never imagined that my greatest pain would come from the person who should have supported me the most. I came home excited to share a new idea that Pamela and I had discussed. As soon as I entered, I saw Emma sitting on the sofa with a rigid expression. James was next to her, arms crossed, the air thick with tension. Before I could say anything, Emma spoke. "Why are you destroying our family?" That hit me like an invisible, precise, cold blow. I tried to understand. I asked what she meant, but James took the lead. He said I was absent, that I no longer took care of the house, that I was distancing myself from her. His words came out as if they had been rehearsed. And Emma, she believed him. She looked at me with hard eyes without her usual sweetness, as if I were an intruder in my own home. I explained calmly that studying wasn't abandonment. It was also for us. I said that I continued to be a mother, a woman present, even amidst the exhaustion. But Emma didn't listen to me. Or rather, she had already heard another version, and she chose to believe it. The truth, coming from me, seemed too fragile in the face of her father's narrative. Emma looked at me as if I were a stranger. The silence between us grew in the following days. I woke up, made coffee, and Emma passed me by as if I were just a shadow. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't answer with more than a nod. James, on the contrary, seemed pleased with the situation. He maintained an artificial calm, as if controlling everything from afar, with a slight smile. I watched my daughter drift away little by little. I saw her loyalty shift, as if my efforts pushed her away instead of inspiring her. It hurt to realize that, for her, my new beginning was seen as selfishness, when, in reality, it was an act of love for myself and deep down for her too. But no explanation seemed sufficient. I watched them from afar, talking, laughing, as if they formed a team to which I no longer belonged. The pain wasn't just rejection. It was powerlessness, because even as a mother I could no longer reach her. And all of this, I knew, was fueled by someone who should have protected me, and not opposed me. My daughter had chosen his side. One afternoon after class, I ran into Brenda in the hallway. One look from her was enough for me to break down. She took me to the college cafeteria, ordered some tea, and just sat there listening. I told her everything, about Emma's distance, James's distorted words, the emptiness growing between me and my own daughter. Brenda didn't interrupt. She just held my hand. When I finally spoke the last sentence, she took a deep breath. "She's confused, Anna. She's seeing everything through his eyes, and she hasn't developed her own yet." Her words brought relief and sadness at the same time, because I knew it was true. Emma wasn't cruel. She was being led by someone who knew how to manipulate. Brenda continued. "You're doing the right thing. It just doesn't feel like it yet." The hug she gave me afterward was long, silent, true. I leaned my head on her shoulder and let the tears fall without guilt. She wasn't my mother, but at that moment she was the comfort I so desperately needed. I didn't hear ready-made advice or cliches. I heard understanding, and that's what kept me going. She wasn't my mother, but she was the comfort I needed. That night I returned home in silence. Emma was already asleep, and James watched TV as if nothing had happened. But inside me something had changed. I was no longer trying to prove my worth to him, nor trying to force my daughter to understand me. I just wanted to keep going even with the pain, because this path was necessary even if lonely. Emma's absence was like a hole in my chest, but I was beginning to understand that not all absence is permanent, that sometimes you have to lose a bond to rebuild it more truly. Even so, it hurt, and I carried that pain with dignity, no longer begging for acceptance. I still loved her, and I always would. But now I also needed to learn to love myself, to embrace my own pain with patience, to trust that with time everything would be revealed, and that, even without the support of those who mattered most to me, I would continue, one step at a time, with faith, with firmness. I had lost my daughter's support for now. The semester advanced, and with it my name began to be recognized by the professors. Ronald called me one of the most promising students in the class. Pamela and I were developing a project that was attracting attention, and we were nominated for a special presentation at the college's upcoming internal conference. I was flattered, proud, and determined to do my best. This was more than a project, it was proof that I could. At the test presentation for the evaluating board, I heard compliments I never imagined receiving out loud. They spoke of the clarity of the proposal, the strategic vision, the originality. I felt that, for the first time, my mind was seen, not just my domestic role. I left the room smiling, my body light, my soul warmed. But as I turned the corner, I saw James standing in the distance. And he wasn't smiling. He had come to pick me up without telling me. He stood there, arms crossed, observing the commotion. He didn't say a word on the way home. But I felt the stiffness in the air, the discomfort, the unease of someone who realizes they've lost control. It wasn't admiration growing in him. It was anger disguised as silence. James heard everything from the hallway, and he didn't like it. In the following days, I immersed myself in preparing the final materials. Graphs, data, analyses, everything needed to be perfect. I spent hours refining details, carefully reviewing each point. I saved the files on the computer as I always did and went to sleep exhausted, but with a sense of accomplishment. We were ready to send the project to the coordination. It would be our moment. The next morning, as I opened the file for a final check, something was wrong. Missing data. Erased tables. Altered texts. My heart pounded. I tried to convince myself it was a technical glitch, but something inside me said otherwise. Pamela arrived, looked with me and confirmed. The changes were recent. Anna. Someone messed with this. And it wasn't you. I was in shock. Who would be interested in sabotaging my work? Pamela made a copy of the backup she had saved on her laptop. It was the only intact version. Thanks to her, we were able to recover the content. But the scare made it clear that this hadn't been an accident. It was a message. And the worst part, someone close enough to have access to my machine. Someone tampered with my work, and only Pamela noticed. We investigated discreetly until we managed to track the access history. The times didn't match mine, and the access IP was the same as my house. My stomach churned. James. There was no other logical explanation. He knew where I kept the notebook, he had seen my enthusiasm. And now there was a trail, silent but clear. I waited for him to arrive. I called him to talk, showed him the data, the file comparison, the times. He feigned surprise, tried to evade, said perhaps Emma had accidentally touched it. But my daughter didn't even have access to the system. When I pressed him, he raised his voice and turned his back. That reaction was all I needed to be certain. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just fell silent. Because deep down I already knew. I just didn't want to admit it. He had crossed an invisible line, and now there was no turning back. The man who promised to protect me was sabotaging my steps, silently behind my back. This wasn't just disappointment. It was betrayal. He denied it, but the traces were there. I went back to the bedroom and closed the door firmly. There was nothing more to discuss. Nothing more to wait for. He was not just indifferent to my growth, he was a threat to it. And that changed everything. I looked at my papers, my notebooks, my notes, and I understood now more than ever I needed to keep going. For myself. The trust that once existed between us was irreparably broken. It was no longer a Cold War. It was a silent battle for my very existence. He wanted me to give up. He wanted to extinguish the flame before it became fire. But it was too late. Because I was already burning inside. And there was no way to put me out without destroying me. But I would not be destroyed. I was growing. Even with sabotage. Even with betrayals. Even with a wounded heart. And now I clearly saw what I was facing and who I was facing. And that, however painful, was a liberation. Now I knew. He was capable of anything to bring me down. A few days after the restored project presentation, I received an unexpected email. Edward Young, one of the businessmen on the evaluation panel, wanted to schedule a meeting with me. I thought it was a mistake. But as I read the words carefully, I realized he was genuinely interested in the proposal. I was nervous. He was an important name in the market, and I was just a student starting over from scratch. We scheduled a meeting at the coffee shop near the college. He was direct. Your project has soul. And soul is worth more than technique. He spoke firmly but kindly. He said he saw viability in what Pamela and I were proposing and that he was willing to invest. I could barely believe what I was hearing. It was as if the universe was returning everything that had been taken from me. I asked why he was so interested and he replied simply, "Because you are doing what many are afraid to do. Starting from scratch." In that instant I realized he saw something in me that I couldn't even see clearly. A silent, determined, transformative force. I left that meeting with sweaty hands and a heart on fire. He saw something in me that I didn't even see. Days later he called me again for lunch. He wanted to tell me something personal. He spoke of his daughter, Sarah, who gave up her career to support her husband. When she tried to start over, she was discouraged and shortly after abandoned. I listened to every word carefully, feeling a painful identification. It was as if he were describing my own journey. Edward said he watched his daughter fade away little by little, until she disappeared from her own life. I couldn't save her, but I can help others like her, he said. That stuck with me. He wasn't investing just for business. He was investing for reparation, for silent justice. And that's what made that proposal even more significant. It came loaded with true intent. At that moment, I realized that the connection that united us went beyond the project. It was a common cause, a collective rescue of so many invisible stories. Women like Sarah, women like me, and perhaps one day even my daughter would understand what we were trying to build. I took a deep breath. For the first time, I didn't fear what was to come. I felt purpose. His daughter lived exactly what I was living. With Edward's support, Pamela and I met one rainy afternoon and decided it was time to create our own company, a startup that would welcome, train, and empower women starting over. We laughed at the courage that required, but also at the certainty we carried. It was daring, yes, but it was necessary. And more than anything, it was possible. We spent days outlining the business plan, choosing the name, defining values. With each meeting, the excitement grew. We felt we were creating something bigger than ourselves. It wasn't just a company. It was a movement. Something born of real pains, of scars that now became maps for other women. Our office was still makeshift, set up among books and boxes in the corner of the room. But it already breathed like a home for new ideas. We put everything into practice diligently. Strategy, target audience, network of contacts. We didn't know how far we would go, but we knew exactly why we were starting. And that was enough for us not to stop. Pamela and I were about to build something of our own. The sky seemed clearer and so did my soul. But life, I knew, wasn't linear. As much as I wanted to believe that from then on everything would be expansion, there was still something unresolved waiting for me. Something within my own home. James, silent, still lingered like a shadow at the end of the hallway. And what I didn't know was that this shadow would still move. The next morning, as I opened the file for a final check, something was wrong. Missing data. Erased tables. Altered texts. My heart pounded. I tried to convince myself it was a technical glitch, but something inside me said otherwise. Pamela arrived, looked with me, and confirmed. The changes were recent. Anna. Someone messed with this. And it wasn't you. I was in shock. Who would be interested in sabotaging my work? Pamela made a copy of the backup she had saved on her laptop. It was the only intact version. Thanks to her, we were able to recover the content. But the scare made it clear that this hadn't been an accident. It was a message. And the worst part, someone close enough to have access to my machine. Someone tampered with my work. And only Pamela noticed. We investigated discreetly until we managed to track the access history. The times didn't match mine, and the access IP was the same as my house. My stomach churned. James. There was no other logical explanation. He knew where I kept the notebook, he had seen my enthusiasm. And now there was a trail, silent but clear. I waited for him to arrive. I called him to talk, showed him the data, the file comparison, the times. He feigned surprise, tried to evade. Said perhaps Emma had accidentally touched it. But my daughter didn't even have access to the system. When I pressed him, he raised his voice and turned his back. That reaction was all I needed to be certain. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just fell silent. Because deep down I already knew. I just didn't want to admit it. He had crossed an invisible line, and now there was no turning back. The man who promised to protect me was sabotaging my steps. Silently behind my back. This wasn't just disappointment. It was betrayal. He denied it, but the traces were there. I went back to the bedroom and closed the door firmly. There was nothing more to discuss. Nothing more to wait for. He was not just indifferent to my growth, he was a threat to it. And that changed everything. I looked at my papers, my notebooks, my notes, and I understood now more than ever I needed to keep going. For myself. The trust that once existed between us was irreparably broken. It was no longer a cold war. It was a silent battle for my very existence. He wanted me to give up. He wanted to extinguish the flame before it became fire. But it was too late. Because I was already burning inside. And there was no way to put me out without destroying me. But I would not be destroyed. I was growing. Even with sabotage. Even with betrayals. even with a wounded heart. And now I clearly saw what I was facing and who I was facing. And that, however painful, was a liberation. Now I knew he was capable of anything to bring me down. A few days after the restored project presentation, I received an unexpected email. Edward Young, one of the businessmen on the evaluation panel, wanted to schedule a meeting with me. I thought it was a mistake. But as I read the words carefully, I realized he was genuinely interested in the proposal. I was nervous. He was an important name in the market, and I was just a student starting over from scratch. We scheduled a meeting at the coffee shop near the college. He was direct. Your project has soul, and soul is worth more than technique. He spoke firmly but kindly. He said he saw viability in what Pamela and I were proposing and that he was willing to invest. I could barely believe what I was hearing. It was as if the universe was returning everything that had been taken from me. I asked why he was so interested and he replied simply, "Because you are doing what many are afraid to do, starting from scratch." In that instant I realized he saw something in me that I couldn't even see clearly. A silent, determined, transformative force. I left that meeting with sweaty hands and a heart on fire. He saw something in me that I didn't even see. Days later he called me again for lunch. He wanted to tell me something personal. He spoke of his daughter, Sarah, who gave up her career to support her husband. When she tried to start over, she was discouraged and shortly after abandoned. I listened to every word carefully, feeling a painful identification. It was as if he were describing my own journey. Edward said he watched his daughter fade away little by little, until she disappeared from her own life. I couldn't save her, but I can help others like her, he said. That stuck with me. He wasn't investing just for business. He was investing for reparation, for silent justice. And that's what made that proposal even more significant. It came loaded with true intent. At that moment I realized that the connection that united us went beyond the project. It was a common cause, a collective rescue of so many invisible stories. Women like Sarah. Women like me. And perhaps one day, even my daughter would understand what we were trying to build. I took a deep breath. For the first time I didn't fear what was to come. I felt purpose. His daughter lived exactly what I was living. With Edward's support, Pamela and I met one rainy afternoon and decided it was time to create our own company. A startup that would welcome, train, and empower women starting over. We laughed at the courage that required, but also at the certainty we carried. It was daring, yes, but it was necessary. And more than anything, it was possible. We spent days outlining the business plan, choosing the name, defining values. With each meeting, the excitement grew. We felt we were creating something bigger than ourselves. It wasn't just a company. It was a movement. Something born of real pains, of scars that now became maps for other women. Our office was still makeshift, set up among books and boxes in the corner of the room. But it already breathed like a home for new ideas. We put everything into practice diligently. Strategy, target audience, network of contacts. We didn't know how far we would go, but we knew exactly why we were starting. And that was enough for us not to stop. Pamela and I were about to build something of our own. The sky seemed clearer and so did my soul. But life, I knew, wasn't linear. As much as I wanted to believe that from then on everything would be expansion, there was still something unresolved waiting for me. Something within my own home. James, silent, still lingered like a shadow at the end of the hallway. And what I didn't know was that this shadow would still move. I was rising, strengthening myself, creating new roots. But there was an emotional debt that fate had not yet collected, and it was about to arrive. I took a deep breath as I closed my eyes that night. The startup was born, yes, but with it, an inevitable confrontation with everything I had silenced for years was also born. Because growing bothers people, and sometimes it scares them, especially those who bet on your defeat. I no longer feared James, but I felt that he would not accept this new reality so easily. And I was right. The reunion with my most painful past was lurking, and this time there was no avoiding it. But fate still held a reckoning. The startup began to gain recognition, and I felt more secure with each step. That night I came home later, after a promising meeting with investors. I went up the stairs in silence and heard James talking on the phone in the office. His voice was loud, filled with sarcasm. She thinks she's a CEO now. It won't last. She'll crash and come crawling back. My breath caught. Those words, spoken with such disdain, seemed to come from a stranger's mouth. He laughed heartily. A laugh that mixed contempt and pleasure. The same laugh as when he first doubted me. Before I could react, I heard light footsteps in the hallway. It was Emma standing there, her eyes wide. She heard everything. She stood motionless, trying to process what she had just witnessed. James hung up the phone and turning saw her there. The silence that followed was louder than any scream. For the first time his mask fell before her. And there was no way to hide it. No way to erase what had been exposed with such cruelty. Emma listened and froze. That night dinner was silent. Emma barely touched her food, her eyes fixed on her plate. James tried to feign normality, but the discomfort was evident. I remained calm. I knew a crack had opened, and now finally it wasn't just mine. After dinner, Emma discreetly called me to talk. Her gaze was somber but determined. We sat in the living room. She took a deep breath and asked if it was true. If her father often spoke about me that way. I wanted to protect her from the pain, but I chose to be honest. I said yes. That many times he had diminished me, and that she didn't realize it because he did it subtly. Her eyes filled with tears. Emma was silent for a few seconds. Then she got up and went straight to her father. "You lied to me," she said. "You mocked her behind her back." James tried to deny it, but she wouldn't listen. For the first time, my daughter didn't back down. She looked at him as if, at last, seeing the truth that had been there all along, hidden in plain sight. She could no longer defend her father. The next day, I woke up to a note on the kitchen table. "Can we talk after class?" It was from Emma. I waited all day with a tight heart, not knowing what to expect. When she came back, she went straight to her room. Minutes later, she came to me, her eyes red and her voice low. "Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't see everything." She sat beside me and for the first time in months, spoke with an open heart. She said she had believed everything her father said, because it was easier than accepting that he also made mistakes. She cried, asked for forgiveness for having distanced herself, for having judged me. I hugged her tightly, feeling the weight of the reconciliation I had so longed for. She said she now saw my strength, that she understood how unfair she had been to me. She said she was proud and that she wanted to be by my side. I didn't hold back my tears, because that apology wasn't just hers. It was mine too. For the part one kept silent. For the part one erased. But now there we started again together. "Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't see everything." That night dinner was different. Not because of the words spoken, but because of the silent energy that enveloped us. Emma sat beside me. James on the other side of the table said nothing, and this time his silence wasn't control. It was impotence. He knew he had lost something, and I knew I had recovered everything that mattered most. Seeing my daughter look at me with admiration gave me more strength than any professional victory, because deep down it was for her that I had persisted so much, so that she would know that it was possible to rise again, that no matter how much time had passed, there is always a way back to oneself. And now she knew. The resentment still existed, but they no longer separated us. They served as a bridge. We were more united, more aware, and ready to move forward side by side. For the first time, I felt that I wasn't walking alone, and that was the greatest victory of all. Now I had my daughter back and stronger than ever. That morning, James arrived home earlier than usual. The briefcase in his hands, his lost gaze, and his slumped posture said it all even before he opened his mouth. He sat on the couch and announced without preamble, "I was fired." No long explanation, no justification. Just the dry realization that the inevitable had happened. The arrogance that had accompanied him seemed to have been forcibly ripped away. For days he tried to find a new position. He sent resumes, called old contacts, went to interviews. But the market had changed and so had he. His superior attitude, which once impressed, now pushed people away. His speeches no longer convinced. His age, once a symbol of experience, was now read as resistance to change. One by one, the no's accumulated. Emma observed everything in silence, and so did I. Not with pleasure, but with a certain sense of justice. Because life sometimes gives back what you put out. Until one day he sought me out. I heard you're hiring. I looked into his eyes and saw something new: vulnerability. For the first time, he wasn't speaking from a position of power. He was speaking from the edge. No one wanted him. Until he knocked on our door. I took a deep breath before answering. I had the opportunity to give back everything I had heard, felt, and kept silent for years. But I chose silence. Pamela questioned my decision to include him in the selection process. Are you sure you want him close to you? I also questioned myself. But deep down I already knew the answer. Sometimes the greatest power lies in not retaliating. I invited James for a formal interview. He arrived on time, quiet, more reserved. I sat before him with a form in hand and a calm soul. I explained that the position was for an internship. A journey's beginning, learning, a foundation. No leadership roles. No privileges. He swallowed the condition dryly but didn't back down. He was willing to accept. Not for me but for himself. Or perhaps because he had no choice. I didn't want revenge. I wanted to show to myself that I had won without destroying anyone. That I didn't need to hurt to be strong. That it was possible to be firm and fair at the same time. In that moment I realized I was no longer part of his story. He was now part of mine. I could have humiliated him. But I chose something greater. The auditorium was packed. It was the day of the startup's official presentation to the external public, with investors, professors, and students present. Pamela opened with energy and charisma, and then it was my turn. I went on stage with butterflies in my stomach, but with my head held high. I spoke about the project, the mission, the values that guided us. And then, I made the announcement. Today we are proud to reveal the new phase of the company. We have grown. We have evolved. And like every growing company, we also train new people. I paused. Everyone awaited the outcome. Our newest intern will start today. Eyes met. And I continued. James Wright. An absolute silence filled the room. And then whispers. Expressions of astonishment. James, sitting in the back, slowly stood up. He walked to the stage without raising his eyes. There was no more arrogance. Only presence. I watched him go up and stood beside him. Everyone deserves a second chance, including those who once underestimated us. There was no rancor in my voice. Only truth. And when I looked at the audience, I saw respect, admiration, and a certain awe. All eyes were on us. For a moment everything stopped. Time, noises, judgments. Only that instant existed. Me standing next to the man who once laughed at my dreams. Now he received instructions. I gave them. With serenity, not with revenge. Because winning wasn't seeing him down. It was seeing myself standing whole before everyone who once doubted. Applause began discreetly, then stronger. But for me, what resonated most was the initial silence. The silence of those who understand without needing words what is happening. It wasn't a public revenge. It was a milestone. A new chapter. And for the first time I knew I was exactly where I should be. I looked at Emma in the audience. She smiled. And in that smile was all the confirmation I needed. The story had turned. Not because someone fell but because I rose. And I would never again bow. Neither for love nor for fear. Nor for anyone. I am the new CEO. And this is our new intern, James Wright. The silence in the room was the greatest response I could wish for. The day after the presentation, my phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Social media was full of comments, photos, and praise. People I hadn't seen in years sent me messages. Teachers, former colleagues, women I didn't even know. All saying how inspired they felt. It was as if suddenly my story had gained a wider echo than I ever imagined. Some messages came with typed tears. Thank you for showing that it's possible. You gave a voice to so many of us. I read each one with tear-filled eyes and a different beating heart. What started with a timid enrollment had turned into a movement. The domino effect of my courage now knocked on the door of other stories. Other voices rose. Pamela and I received invitations for lectures, interviews, meetings with female entrepreneurship networks. The startup flourished, and not just in results. It flourished as a symbol. And I, even tired, felt renewed. Something inside me said that this was just the first wave. The first page of a new book. Messages started coming from all sides. While the world reacted, James sank into an increasingly dense silence. He arrived on time, did his tasks, avoided eye contact. There was no irony, no complaints, just an uncomfortable stillness, as if the weight of the new reality was slowly settling on his shoulders. For the first time, he didn't occupy a place of power, and that disarmed him. No one on the team treated him badly, but they didn't revere him either. He was just another person, one among many, and perhaps that was his true punishment. Realizing that, without arrogance, he was just an ordinary man. That respect is not demanded, it is built. And he still hadn't learned to rebuild. Neither himself nor the relationships he destroyed. Emma observed him with a mixture of compassion and criticism. She didn't attack him, but she didn't defend him either. She was by my side, learning and growing. It was with me that she shared ideas, plans, decisions. And he saw that. He felt that. It was as if, finally, he understood what he had lost, and what he could no longer control. He seemed smaller than I had ever seen him. Even amid the accelerated pace of the startup, I allowed myself a night just for me. I turned off my cell phone, closed my computer, prepared a hot tea, and sat alone on the porch. The sky was clear, and the silence was a rare gift. I took a deep breath. For the first time in a long time, I felt no guilt, no fear, no urgency to prove anything to anyone. I closed my eyes and mentally revisited the journey. The pain, the sleepless nights, the confrontations, the losses. Everything was still there, but now in peace. Like memories that no longer bled. I had crossed the storm. And now, finally, the shelter was within me. It was no longer about defeating the other. It was about finding my own center. Sleeping that night was different. I lay down without expecting anything. Without carrying anything. Without clinging to what would come next. And still with a full soul. Because the peace that comes after the war makes no noise. It just occupies the space that pain left. And there, in that silence, I rediscovered myself whole. For the first time, I slept without weight on my chest. Looking at everything I lived through, I realized there was no more anger. There was memory, yes. There were scars. But no more open wounds. The journey that began with a cruel laugh now led me to a place of fullness. Not because everything had been resolved, but because I no longer needed it to be. The past no longer dictated my present. James was there, still trying to understand his place. But it was no longer about him. It was about me. About who I chose to become despite everything. And deep down I knew forgiving wasn't forgetting. It was moving on. With dignity. With courage. With the clear conscience of someone who did the best they could, even when everything was against them. The end of the pain wasn't a scream. It was an inner whisper that said, "Enough now." And it was enough. Because my end was never revenge. It was reconstruction. It was freedom. And above all, it was the beginning of everything that was yet to come. But the end was not revenge. It was a new beginning. The startup grew. Little by little, we hired new people, occupied a larger space, expanded our reach. The project that was born from silent pains became a reference for other women. We created partnerships with universities, NGOs, and female entrepreneurship networks. Our mission remained alive, not out of vanity, but because it was necessary. Each woman we helped was a mirror of what I once was. We began to receive emotional testimonials. Letters, audio messages, long hugs in the hallways. Women who said, "I went back to school because of you. I had the courage to leave what was hurting me. You inspired me." It was as if the pain that forged me now served as a bridge for others to rebuild themselves. And that was worth more than any award or recognition. Pamela remained by my side, firm, creative, loyal. Our friendship was the foundation of what we built. The work was intense but full of meaning. With each meeting, each new idea, we felt we were doing something real. Something that would stand the test of time. And even on difficult days, there was a burning flame. A silent certainty that this was just the beginning. Other women started reaching out to me. Emma got involved little by little, first with small tasks, then taking on more strategic areas. I saw a sparkle in her that moved me. She was critical, curious, dedicated. And, above all, she respected the path I had taken. Working with her was more than a dream. It was the mending of a bond that was almost lost, now rebuilt with awareness. We shared decisions, learned together, laughed at ourselves when things didn't go as planned. Seeing my daughter grow by my side, contributing to something so much bigger than us, was a daily gift. We weren't just mother and daughter, we were partners. Two women who had found each other in the midst of chaos and chosen to walk together. She started participating in meetings with investors, giving suggestions, defending our ideas firmly. And every time I listened to her, I recognized myself in her. In her courage, her empathy, her vision for the future. Emma didn't just come back to me. She flourished with me. And that, in itself, was a victory that no material achievement could surpass. Working with my daughter was a gift I never imagined. Today, I look at everything with serenity. The pains of the past still live within me, but they no longer rule. They taught me, shaped me, brought me here. I am a whole woman. Not perfect, but whole. And that is more than I dreamed of when I started. Because now, finally, my identity doesn't depend on anyone. Neither on roles nor on titles. I didn't need to retaliate. I didn't need to humiliate. I needed to win. Silently, firmly, with constant steps. The power that was once denied to me is now responsibility. I don't use it to belittle but to uplift. I don't want thrones. I want a legacy. I want to be the living reminder that every woman has the right to start over, and to flourish even after being pruned so much. When they call me an inspiration, I smile humbly, because I know where I came from, and because I haven't forgotten who I was. That invisible woman, discredited, unaccustomed to being seen. Today I am heard. I am respected. I am loved even by myself. And that, for me, is the true triumph. I didn't need to retaliate. I needed to win. And when I remember that laugh, the one that once tried to diminish me, I no longer feel pain. I feel strength. Because it was in that harsh, scornful sound that something in me awakened. That laugh, which should have silenced me, pushed me. It forced me out of the shadows. It made me look in the mirror and ask, is this what you want to accept forever? The answer was no. And since then, I have been saying yes to myself. Yes to studies. Yes to choices. Yes to falls and new beginnings. Yes to the woman I have become. It wasn't easy. It wasn't quick. But it was true. And because of that, nothing and no one can take away what I have built. Life now pulses differently. There are still challenges, but there is also faith. There are still pains, but there are also roots. And every step I take carries all the versions of me that survived the journey. They walk with me. And together we make history. A story that began with contempt and ended with freedom. And that laugh? Today it echoes as fuel for my strength. Now, I'm curious about you who heard my story. What would you do if you were in my shoes? Have you experienced something similar? Support the channel by subscribing, liking, commenting, and sharing this video. I'm leaving another story on the final screen that you'll also enjoy, and it will definitely surprise you. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.